Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, this is Teacher FYI. I'm Mackenzie and I teach 5th grade in Northern California. So first of all, what a year it has already been. This is my 6th year of teaching. We are a month into the school year and things continue to change, and I know I am definitely not alone in this. I know a lot of teachers have been thrown into new situations this year, whether it be virtual teaching, hybrid teaching, or teaching face-to-face in the middle of a pandemic. I've heard from many teachers that they are feeling almost like first-year teachers again this year. And if you are a first-year teacher, which is already challenging enough, please know that you are not alone. We are all in this together and more than ever need to support each other. So I went on to Reddit where teachers share their experiences and their questions, and I wanted to see what teachers were asking specifically related to virtual teaching. So in today's video, I'm going to be answering some of the questions that I saw popping up as they relate to virtual teaching to provide my perspective since I will be teaching remotely the entire year. Okay, so the first question is how to reward children online. So virtual rewards can definitely still work. So personally, I've used ClassDojo the past few years. I love it because it is so easy to reward individual points or group points or even use it as a whole class reward. But no matter what point system you're using or what classroom management system you're using, you're going to have to think, okay, what are my students actually working towards? And what are those virtual rewards really going to be? Now, this is usually a conversation I have at the beginning of the year with my students. We make a big list of rewards that they want to work towards because I have learned anytime you can involve your students, there'll be more buy-in and they'll be more motivated to actually work towards those rewards. So some rewards for individual and group that we've decided on include lunch bunches on Zoom together with their friends, also getting to choose a game to play with the class on Friday. And I don't know if you know, but on Zoom there's also the actual face filters. They're pretty much like Snapchat filters, and it's something you definitely want your students to use during class. But I am using it as a reward for groups to win. So they're able to use the face filter on Zoom for the day, which is pretty funny. Of course, I probably will do that on a Friday. Now, as a whole class, I always have my students working towards Fun Friday at the end of the week, and Fun Friday can involve a fun activity like a directed drawing on Zoom or a virtual field trip, and that could even be chosen by the group that wins that week, for example. So something new that I'm doing this year, I'm actually starting this week, so I'm really excited about it, is using virtual badges for individual rewards. So students are able to collect the badges and we're just keeping them on a Google slide. I know if you use a system like Schoology, they have virtual badges embedded that you can give to your students. But I'm just creating my own, and then my students are able to collect them all in their Google slide deck and share it with their parents, and they can keep it private. They don't need to share it with the class. And you can make a badge for really anything, like for completing their assignments or maybe clicking that turn in button on Google Classroom. Have a badge for the longest streak of doing that, because why can't they press the turn in button? Okay, next question. Tips for virtual classroom management. And it sounds like this person is having trouble with their kids unmuting to talk and yell into the mic, and they are in 3rd grade. So not gonna lie, it was so nice in spring when we were starting on Zoom and we had that glorious mute all button. But of course, students can still unmute themselves, and we do want our students participating, but we want them to do that in a manner that will help our classrooms be productive still. Now, this ties in with that last question about ways to reward your class online. So I do think it's important to go over those expectations, but also have things that your students can work towards and be excited about. Sometimes it may be as simple as giving their students a lot more breaks than you think, especially being online and staring at that screen. Just letting them get their sillies out can be really beneficial for them on that screen. And then if it seems like it's a whole class problem, like if there's multiple kids unmuting themselves to scream into the mic, then I would have it be a whole class reward that they're working towards. Maybe every day where that doesn't happen, they earn a point. When I was in my real classroom, and I could see this working virtually too, I would just write the words Fun Friday on the board, and then if my students were being too chatty, then I would take off a letter, and then I would still give them opportunities to earn that letter back, but they needed to have the letters up by Friday in order to earn Fun Friday. I've also seen teachers write the word noise if it's a noise issue, and then they could lose letters, and once it gets down to the last few letters, then they either don't get that Fun Friday or whatever else they're working towards. If it is only 1 or 2 students that are unmuting their mic to talk out and interrupt the class, then I would definitely have a meeting with just them to really see what's going on there and and strengthen your relationship with that student. Maybe either have a secret signal to see if maybe they just need a brain break and you could give them that signal and they just take a few laps around the house. Or maybe say, if we have a really good week, I'll let you choose the Go Noodle for that Friday. The first day where they successfully don't unmute their mic to yell into it, then be sure to send a note home, tell them they're a rock star, best student ever, and give them that recognition, because that positive reinforcement really can work wonders. Then you're giving positive attention to that behavior that you want to see more of. Okay, next question. Virtual meeting attendance, what do you do? And it sounds like this person was using a Google form to do it at first. Okay, so to be honest, I tried the whole Google form thing for attendance at the beginning of the year, and it was just not for me. I realized I already have enough grading to go through, and I didn't want another thing on top of all of that just to check off for attendance. And so what I do instead is I just make a simple Google sheet. I have all the student names listed, and then I just have inserted check boxes, and I can just check off as I go. Now for morning meeting, I do something a little differently. So I still use my Google sheet with all of their names and check them off. However, I have my students do a greeting every morning. So I have a list with all of my students' names on it, and I share that with my students on my screen, and then their job is to greet the person that comes after them. So as I'm listening to their greetings in the morning, I just hear their names and I'm just checking off as they are greeting each student. Now for my Zoom calls that are later in the day when my students are coming back and we need to take attendance, then I always open the room about 5 minutes early, and then my students are usually pretty good about coming to class a few minutes early because I tell them that it starts directly on the hour. And so as they're coming in, I just check them off, and it really hasn't been too much of an issue. Bonus, you can make a badge for always being on time if that is a problem with students coming in late. There also is a way on Zoom when you go into your profile where you can actually see the history of your participants for each of those meetings. So as long as your students have renamed themselves to their name, you can easily go back and check it that way too. I still find the Google Sheet the most efficient though. Okay, so this next question says, how do I deal with an easily excitable online class? So it sounds like this is a new teacher and they are trying to find the balance between letting their students socialize while also having control of the class. I totally feel for this person because I remember being a new teacher. I wanted to be the cool teacher, but I also was lacking some basic classroom management. Now, of course, we want our students to socialize, especially right now during a pandemic. They are not getting those social skills and that time to really interact with their classmates as much as they're used to. However, we also need to do our jobs and get through our lessons and make sure that we are providing solid instruction for our students. So in order to find that balance, I do suggest that you set those expectations, but in this case, it's 9th graders, and having a conversation with them, I feel they would understand about why they need those boundaries, because during a lesson, they need to be on topic, for example, in the chat box, and it wouldn't be very helpful if they were talking about Roblox. I don't know if 9th graders play Roblox, but if they were talking about Roblox in the chat to each other, they are obviously not engaged in the lesson. And so that's going to affect their learning, and I do believe that 9th graders would understand that. So allowing them breaks to socialize, so after part of your lesson, they could have a little break, or at the beginning of class and at the end of class, allowing time where you were there, where they can still talk with their classmates. Especially if you have older kids, I really think that they can play a big part in having those discussions with you about setting those expectations and understanding why they are important to be put in place. So for example, in my class, I let them talk to each other in the chat box before class officially starts on the hour. They can use emojis, they can talk about anything appropriate, and then they can also do that at the very end of class. And then once class starts, I say, okay, chat box on topic, and they know that is for questions or to comment with what another student shared or to respond to anything that I'm talking about in the lesson. So I'm all for still providing your students a reasonable amount of time to socialize with each other, and also maybe have a lunch bunch with them sometimes, or setting aside extra time for them to socialize. So maybe on Friday, say, okay, I'm going to open up the Google Meet or the Zoom 10 minutes early, and you can come on in and chat with your friends. Next question, what are your best favorite remote connection before content activities with kids? Something beyond a typical icebreaker that perhaps goes a bit deeper. So I am a fan of responsive classroom, and I do follow the responsive classroom structure for morning meeting. So we first start with a greeting, we then go into a share of some kind, and then an activity to build some community, and then finally a message to connect our content. So the share and activity are really good opportunities to dig a little deeper with your students, especially the share portion. So some examples to dig a little deeper might be sharing a rose and a thorn with your students, meaning at the end of the week, students share something that was great about their week, something that was a little challenging, or doing it on a Monday to share about their week. weekend. Also, virtual show and tell. I honestly feel all grades love this, even high school, but having your students bring something that is special to them and important to them and sharing that with the class is a great way for your class to get to know each other. Having your students describe their mood as a color and explaining why they chose that color to match their mood. If you do want some icebreakers and activities to play with your kids during morning meeting, I do have a video that shares some of my favorite activities to do morning meeting, and I'll put the link down in the description. Okay, next question. So, need some advice and directions. So when meeting with my class on Google Meet, is there a way to see my students and the chat box when you are presenting? So, quick tech tip. Just sign into another device, so that can be your phone, that could be your iPad, and just use it purely to monitor the chat. So I don't have another monitor, I've just been using my laptop. Even on Zoom, I can open up the chat box and see it when I am presenting, but then even on my little 13-inch screen, it can not have any room and it feels super crowded. So what I recommend doing on Zoom or Google Meet is just signing into another device, and then you can just use that purely to monitor the chat. Turn the video off and just use it to watch that chat box. Okay, the next question is cameras on or cameras off? So it sounds like this person also has a lot of visual cues they want to use while on camera, which is why they really prefer the camera on. I know many teachers have a strong opinion one way or the other. So personally, my perspective, I don't feel that you need to make your students turn their cameras on if they don't feel comfortable with that. And I do believe that as the year goes on and as they know their classmates better and you better and have built those relationships, they may be more likely to actually turn those cameras on. So personally, participation is what is important to me, and I think there are plenty of other ways to show participation. They can write in the chat box, they can unmute themselves to share out, they can still raise their hand, they can use those Zoom reaction buttons. There's still so many other ways to show that they're participating and actively engaged in those lessons, and it doesn't necessarily require the cameras being on. Now, I totally get it if you are a teacher that uses like whole brain learning and you really want to be able to see your students' faces, and so that is where it becomes a little different, and maybe checking in with those students about why they prefer their cameras off. So I do encourage my students to turn their cameras on. So I have a couple kiddos that like to keep their cameras off, but I have some students that will turn it on, for example, in breakout rooms, or when we're playing a certain game, they'll be more comfortable turning them on because they want to actually play and be part of the class. So for example, at the beginning of the year, I had a student who was not turning his camera on. Then we started playing a game that required them to touch their nose or touch their head, and they ended up turning their cameras on because they really wanted to play that activity with the class. I gave that positive reinforcement to that student that I was really proud of them and I was happy to see them participating, and now they're more likely to turn their camera on throughout class. I want my students to feel comfortable, and I am just happy that they have showed up. Okay, next question. Classroom jobs while online? So yes, I love classroom jobs. In the actual classroom, I had a job for all of my students, and we would switch them on the first of every month, and it was something my students always looked forward to. Now that's going to look very differently in the virtual classroom. There might not be as many jobs that you can think of to give everybody a job, but you may need to just switch them up a little more often. I do use a morning meeting structure, so if you do that too, you could have students in charge of different parts of morning meeting. So you could have them choose the greeting for that day, choose the activity for that day, or the share question. I usually wait to give classroom jobs until about a month into the school year, just so that they know enough greetings, enough activities, and that they have a feel for our routines and procedures. You could also have a student in charge of monitoring the chat box, letting you know if someone has a question, or you could have some fun jobs like a class DJ, and they're in charge of choosing the song that your students listen to as they come into the Zoom meeting, or someone in charge of choosing the brain break for that day, or even somebody in charge of looking up the weather for that morning, and they have to share that during morning meeting. So you can still get creative and have plenty of jobs for your students. Now, when my students work in groups, I do have roles for each of those students, so in a way that's classroom jobs. So when my students go out into breakout rooms for discussion specifically, then I do have certain roles. So there's the leader, and they're in charge of asking the questions. There's the speaker who's in charge of reporting back to the group, the note taker who's in charge of actually filling out a paper for discussion, and then there's also the facilitator who is in charge of making sure everybody's participating in the group. That way they still feel like they have a responsibility when they're working together, and so far that's been working pretty well. Okay, so this last question is advice on the Bitmoji classroom. So Bitmoji classroom seems silly, and they want to know why teachers love them and give some reasons they are open to it. So to be honest, I did at first too when I saw them popping up in the spring, but then I realized really how great of a visual is for some students. I think my favorite part is having a library where students can actually see the books on the shelves and select which one to listen to as a read aloud. Also as math manipulatives organized into the different boxes so that can replicate the way they would see them in your real classroom. I also like to have a page where it shows just the agenda for each of the days so they can easily click the calendar, they can click Monday, and then they can see what they need to do for that day. I do love that it can be very visual as long as we are keeping it really organized and decluttered. So overall, my personal opinion, I think Bitmoji classrooms are super fun. They can be such a great tool, but keeping it simple can really help your students get the most out of it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found some of my answers to those Reddit questions helpful as you navigate this year. If you do have any other questions, please make sure to drop them down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I'll catch you next time. Bye everyone.